My guest today is easily recognized and has kept the plots twisting and the passions burning by playing two lookalike villains, Count Tony DiMera and his impersonator Andre DiMera in Days of Our Lives. That is one of the many characters that Thaao Penghlis has played throughout his illustrious acting career. However, acting was not always his first passion. In today's episode, Thaao and I talk about his new podcast, The Lost Treasures, a thrilling detective, story-like exploration of Greece's greatest contribution to the world's literature, the poet Homer. Welcome to Lifeology.
Oh, thank you. Nice to be here.
I am excited about this. I told many people I was interviewing you, and one of my friends, she was like, oh my goodness, if I had gotten a divorce, I was going to change my last name to DiMera. I was like, oh my Lord. Which you never did. So I'm curious for you to play so many different characters. How is it, I'm sure people see you in real life. I'm sure they treat you as if you are your character. How is it for you to still play that role, I suppose, when you have to in public versus when you're not in public?
Because I've been doing it for so long, I'm kind of used to the idea of just being who I am. I don't have people around me who are praiseworthy or curious about what it is I'm doing. Everybody, comes into the kitchen and we eat and we sit around the table talking about other things.
Yeah, of course.
Rarely does anybody. I mean, I just got back from Istanbul and Greece. Do you think anybody even asked me how it was? I mean, things have become ordinary. The extraordinary today has become ordinary, and the ordinary has become extraordinary. I don't understand how. Like somebody said to me when I put out a piece, and it was a minute and a half. He says, "Too long. People don't have that kind of concentration." And I'm thinking, is this where we are? What do you mean they don't have that kind of concentration? You have to make it interesting. Why wouldn't they stay for a minute and a half? But this is the way the millennials are thinking. Yeah. And I think it's terrible because I think they're missing out.
Yes, I know. For me, when it comes to my production and my team, they've told me the same thing. I'm like, oh, this is fantastic content. And they're like, James, it's too long. And I'm like, but it's good. They're like, regardless, it's too long. I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah. So you have to keep shortening it down more and more to keep people's attention as well.
Yeah, I showed somebody they'd never seen the movie of Dr. Zhivago, and then I showed them also the movie of Lawrence of Arabia. Too long, and too slow. And you think, oh, people don't deal with details. That's true. As actors, part of the beauty of doing a part is the details.
Yes.
The clothing, the makeup,
the nuances,
the shoes, all those things, all those details, and where you are, and what are the color of the walls, all those little details add up to what you're going to be doing that day. And people just come on as if they're enough. And that's why I think you see so many bad films today.
It's a good point.
Because films are in the hands of people who think that way. Too long, too not fast enough. And I'm thinking, what have we done to society's minds?
Yeah. I was watching the show Through the Wormhole with Morgan Freeman. And it was a science show. It was talking about how like extraterrestrials, are they smarter than us? And it was interesting. They said they wouldn't be smarter than us, but they would essentially be dumber than us. I say that in quotations for people who can't see me, because what happens is they're able to plug into the collective. So in other words, when I was a kid, I had to remember everybody's phone numbers. But now I don't remember anybody's phone numbers. I just look at my phone. So people, for the extraterrestrials who are, quote, smarter than us, they don't have to remember things because they can plug into something. So that means we become, quote, dumber and dumber because we don't have to remember things. And I think as society and humans, that's kind of how it is. When we need to know something, we just look at our phone, we look at our smart tablet, whatever, learn that information, but everything else we should remember as we did when we were younger, we no longer have to remember anymore.
Right. And then the electricity goes out, and then you can't put anything on, and then you're left in the dark. What I saw that was good news today on the news is that the students now have to learn to write.
Oh, really?
And I was, you can see the hands and the hands shaking. They don't know how to do an S, or they don't, because it's the same method. You don't look up you have to look up the phone number. So you change your memory. This
Yes,
way, the ability to write is one of the most beautiful forms.
it
To
is.
get a letter, for instance, you get a letter from somebody. Now we get a text. Those
Yes.
days when I was growing up, the letter would come in the mail to thank you for the lovely evening or thank you for the gift. Now it's
Yeah.
thank you so much. It was wonderful seeing you. And that's it. And you're going, does anybody understand how
Yeah.
insignificant that sounds?
Yeah. Yes. And in fact, I heard, well, this last thing we'll say about this, but I even heard that a lot of kids, they've stopped teaching cursive penmanship. It's just simply print. And of course,
Yes.
for me, I'm sure obviously with you as well, we had to learn both, print and the cursive. And so it is interesting to see that a lot of these kids
Yeah.
don't know
So
that
it's good.
information anymore. Now you have your background, so you are Greece, or from your family is from Greece. A lot of people don't realize that. So first off, I was curious with your name, wonderful name. How was it for you going to auditions? How did they? Besides your wonderful acting career, how was it for you to be called? What kind of, I guess, versions of your name did people say?
Oh God, listen, I've gotten everything. It's I think they get a little intimidated. It's interesting to go in. It's an upmanship for me because they're embarrassed they can't pronounce the name properly. So I'm one step ahead that I have to correct them. You know. But most of the time, when you've been around, they do know your name. They do know how to pronounce it. It's the ones who are new in the business or who haven't taken the time to learn, to do their homework. Listen, I was brought up that you don't know enough.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You listen, you pay respect to those who are older. And what the actors the young ones don't understand is they talk the same way to somebody who's 70 to someone who's 20.
Yes.
They don't understand the difference. And I tell them the reason why they're bad actors is because they don't know who they're talking to. So the audience has no idea who they're relating to. So, all point. Those, they're very important steps. That's why in Shakespeare, in As You Like It, Jaques says, there are 5 stages of man. And, every decade has a transition. And if you don't make those transitions, then you're going to find out that you've missed something. So your 20s are very important because that's the time you plant the seeds. Mm-hmm. The 30s, you see where they start to come through the ground and vibrate for you. Your 40s is the platform you're now standing on from the decisions and what you had planted. So each decade has its importance. And that's why, these days, children want to watch things that are quick and that they are in control. I think that is the one area in their lives where they can control because they can turn it on and turn it off.
Mm-hmm. And not only that, from a psychological approach, you like the little TikTok videos, et cetera, those actually create a dopamine hit. And so dopamine is that feel-good chemical. They're like, oh my God, it feels really good. So it creates this loop of I can watch this, I can watch this, I can watch this. So it creates dopamine, but it's almost like a false dopamine hit, if that makes sense. Meaning there's no substance behind it. There wasn't, someone didn't tell a funny joke when they're laughing and creating dopamine. It's this whole manufactured version of dopamine, which allows these kids to create, or these people to continue to create this ill-advised or ill-suited type of dopamine. But, going back to the whole thing where you're saying about respect as well, I think that's a really good point because when people have, quote, paid their dues, they understand the hard work, they understand the nuances, they understand everything that goes along with their acting career. And unfortunately, people who may have had some measure of success don't realize how much those dues mean, how much you have to pay your dues to understand all the highs and lows and the nuances of a craft, to really appreciate it, to really translate one's gift from the silver screen or to the TV across to individuals as well.
Well, when you're listening, you know your cues. Like I allow you to finish what you're saying. I'm not butting in. You see, I have conversations where I'm telling a story, and there are adults around that table who will butt in because they're not listening and because the attention's not on them.
Sure.
So how do you handle that? So for me, all I say to them is, I hadn't finished, and I go on. And they just shut up, and they're always amazed that somebody just, how do you become precise? And that's the beauty of language. That's the beauty. the one thing about Obama that he did well was when he gave a sentence, he always let it land.
Yes.
And then picked it up. People get it that way. So people
Yes.
miss out and they're not listening because, listen, you have something to say, I have something to say, but your time is your time, and I must respect that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why Congress is in the problems that it's in these days, because no one's listening.
Sure. Yeah.
And behind it all is ulterior motives. It's about egos. And that's what happens in conversations at the table, at the watering hole. You know, we all think of ourselves as being, you know, people of God and all that, but we don't. We don't.
Why
It's
not?
only an excuse, you know. So
Yes.
I love the way I was raised. I love the fact that I went to New York with $180 in my pocket and met some of the greatest artists this world has ever known. I was very fortunate who crossed my path. They taught me a lot because I listened.
Yes.
That makes you a stronger human being later.
Mm-hmm.
You'll find that out later. You don't know it then. But all those things that happen in your youth is what you eventually use later on. And when you reach 60, that's the time when you find out who you are and who you've become.
It's interesting. The psychology. Sorry, go ahead. I totally cut you off. Sorry.
No.
Case in point.
There's the point, right? There was the point. You know, but we can laugh about it. You know what I mean? Our egos are not at stake. You know, I can laugh and you can laugh and we can say that was funny.
That's funny.
But anyway,
in psychology, we also have that there's 5 iterations or 5 versions of a person. So usually that's linked with their career or with who they are. So it's interesting. I didn't realize that Shakespeare had said that as well. But yeah, the psychological concept as well is there's 5 different versions of a person as they mature from their adulthood on. And so sometimes that can be in their vocation, that can be in their presentation, that can be in any version of who they are. But when we're not aware of that, we often get stuck in, well, this is how I used to be. Well, that's fine if that's how you used to be, but that's not who you are today. And so the revelation, the understanding that each version of us is very valid, but we have to be aware that we're transitioning. Because if we don't, then all of a sudden we're like, oh, my younger years. And unfortunately, that's where a lot of people can get lost in perhaps a quote midlife crisis, is because they don't realize the different iterations, the different versions of them that have grown throughout the year. And it's just fully accepting that. Once they accept that, then they can revel in the fact of all the different styles and versions in the person that they were before and who they will become.
Yes. You know, the thing is, too, on top of it, is your curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what stimulates you? Because if it's a 2-minute TikTok, that's not going to sustain you. And you're not going to really remember it. What you remember is the longevity of something. You remember a dinner party because it's over a certain amount of time. A lot has taken place within that element. But when you're watching TikTok, it's fun. I say I look at things sometimes, but it doesn't become my life. It doesn't become something I've got to go to. You know, for me, my curiosity is, what am I going to do after this podcast now? Because it's a new field for me. I love writing because one of the things it's helped is my acting. Why? Because when you write a word or a sentence, it has left the mind, and then an action takes place, and you write it. And what happens is when you read that sentence, it has a different vibration to when somebody else wrote it. So I always say to young actors, learn to write short stories. Keep a book of things that were important to you, that find something out about your parents you didn't know. Find out something new in the world that just happened. And that way, when you're writing those things, it has gravitas and it has more meaning and more remembrance. And so as an actor, that language that you read and talk has gravitas. And that's what I found out since I've been writing as much as I have.
We'll transition into your podcast in a second, but just to corroborate what you're saying, the more of your 5 senses you use when you do something, the more it becomes solidified within you. So when you write something, you're using your sense of sight, you're using your sense of touch, and you're using your sense of hearing as you speak it aloud. So there are three of your senses out of the five that you're using. And so when you do that, it becomes crystallized. In other words, it becomes part of who you are because, like I said, the more of your five senses you use, you will always remember it. So that's another reason from a psychological concept why what you're saying is so true as well. Now, let's transition into your podcast, because there's so much we want to talk about here. So your new podcast, The Lost Treasures, it's a thrilling detective story-like exploration of Greece's greatest contribution to the world's literature, Homer. Tell us about that.
It took place when I was in the Archaeological Museum in Athens. Mm-hmm. And a young man had recognized me from the Mission Impossible series I did in the late 80s, early 90s. And as a Greek to a Greek, he said, "What can I do for you?" And I said, "I'd like to meet the Minister of Culture." Mm. And so he set it up that afternoon. The Minister of Culture was very nice. Greeks are proud of each other, especially when you've accomplished and put Greece on the map. Something. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's a small country, but it's got great history. So I met with him. He allowed me to go to Schliemann, who is the discoverer, the father of archaeology. He allowed me to go to his palace that he built that was closed at the time. And he also got permission to the Gennadius Library to go through 60,000 documents, his diaries, his letters, his love letters to his wife, letters he wrote in 22 languages. And so suddenly, that's what I call seeds. Mm-hmm. Those seeds were planted. And I thought, oh, God, that's an interesting history. So I went to Troy. So I sat at the edge of Troy. And my imagination as an actor, I'm sitting on top of 9 cities that started in the early Bronze Age, which was around 2500 BC. So I'm sitting there and imagining in my mind, out there, in front of me was where the Great War took place between the Greeks and the Trojans, mm-hmm. where you think, oh, and that's the Scaean Gate. That's where the Trojan horse went up. That's where the Greeks tricked the Trojans, and that's how they conquered them and put fire to the city. So all those things became when I came home, because I always believe when you come home from the journey that you went to, something about you will have changed.
Yes, agreed.
So for me, the change that took place was thinking about the father of archaeology, who was born in 1821 in Germany, and at the age of 8 said to his father, when he read the book about Géret saying that the treasures of Troy and the walls were burnt down, that he believed that he would find it. And in 1873, he did. And that was the thing that got me fascinated, that somebody that young had a dream, and that dream became a reality. And we're still talking about it today. Wow. And so when you go and see the treasure he found in Mycenae and I can't go to Russia, but in Mycenae, it is extraordinary. When you think of those helmets, those gold swords, the bronze swords, all that wonderful. I mean, we're talking about over 3,000 years ago. So that's what started it all. And for me, it got me going and gave me longevity. If you know what I mean.
Yeah, I understand.
I'm not sitting back bored, and I'm not getting angry because nothing's happening. So I found that the only things that happened in my life were the ones I initiated. Mm-hmm. Yes. So therefore, I decided to do a trilogy. And then I found out about the curse. And there's this great curse in the second phase. And that really is interesting. It is about 2 kings, a great curse. And I was in the building that they built, the tomb. And I sat there and I thought, in this place belonged to the king Atreus. And he had something so much against his brother that when his brother came to meet him and have a big dinner to celebrate, he cut up his children and served them for dinner.
Oh my
And
gosh.
when the other king asked where his sons were, he says, "You just ate them." So the curse began from that. So
I didn't see that coming.
yes, I didn't want to shock you, but it's a shocking story that took place. So the curse continued, and so I talk about that. The third is where I met the most wonderful human being called John Crawshaw. I always think the more successful people are, I don't mean money-wise,
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking about career-wise, the greater they are.
Yeah.
And this man was extraordinary. He invited me to Greece. I went to Kefalonia, and he showed me for a whole day. We walked up and down a mountain, and he showed me where the real Ithaca, where Homer talked about Ulysses coming home. And there I was sitting just above the beach at a restaurant, imagining this is where he came in 1200 BC. He came back home through that cove. So I walked the path. I walked Ulysses' path, which was wonderful. And then I dived in the ancient waters because in many ways I felt I was part of that history.
Wow, I bet. Yeah, I remember I grew up in rural Canada, and I didn't have any TV, which I'm happy about today. But I had a lot of books. I read and read it. But the Iliad was one of my favorite books. I think I was like 12 or 13 years old when I read it. I read the original version of it, and I didn't understand half of it, but I was so immersed in it, the mythology of it, and that's how I became so excited about mythology, etc. So when Laurie DeWall, your publicist, sent me information, I was like, oh my gosh, I really want to talk more about this because the Iliad was one of my favorite books that kind of started my whole fantasy types of series of books that I love to read. So, for you to be able to be there and to experience it all and use your own imagination, I mean, that's, as we know, our imagination is so much greater than any CGI or anything else. So to be able to sit there and conceptualize that and to think about all that, I'm sure that was just mind blowing in so many different ways.
Yeah, you know what was mind blowing? That it wasn't written. It was the ancient bards. They were the orators of the time. During an illiterate age. We're talking about 8th century BC till the 6th century BC. So imagine these guys going into pubs of their days and just men, and I'm sure smoking cigarettes and drinking whatever they were doing. But imagine him playing with an instrument and telling that they were the descendants of heroes that walked the ancient road. And that, would be, and this is what they did, and this is who they become, and this is who we can become. And, so that was the way they stimulated the minds and the spirits of those people. So it continued. So when I went to Turkey, they're still doing it.
Oh, really?
When I drove along the track to go to Gallipoli and then to Troy, I stopped at a bar, and there was a man with his guitar and playing and talking about Troy.
Wow, that's really cool.
And it was like, really cool. Oh my God, this hasn't changed. This has been going on for thousands of years. People love to hear stories of men and women who made a difference in life, who changed history. And they're not a lot, but you read, and some are very brutal, but the fact that they've remained, and a lot of them you think are myths, until someone like Schliemann comes along and smashes them and says, no, they're not myths.
Yeah, it's real.
Puts the flesh on those Trojan heroes and those Greek heroes and makes the story. And therefore, that's why we have movies today. A lot of those characters are built on myths.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Unfortunately, our time is up. You and I could literally talk all day. I love hearing your stories, and I know that my viewers and listeners, when they listen to your podcast as well, they are going to enjoy it as well. If we get a chance to talk too much about it, real quickly, there are three episodes that talk about the lost treasure, and the fourth one is your backstory about all the different things that happen with it as well. Is that correct?
Yes. The fourth one is about me being kidnapped at the pyramids, and Hezbollah grabbed me out of the car in southern Lebanon thinking I was an Israeli spy. Yes, that's the fourth one.
Oh, so, okay. That's definitely have to hear that. I may have to have you come back just to talk about that in general, because that sounds really exciting as well.
Yeah, but if you hear the fourth episode,
There you go.
You'll
Well, Thaao
you'll
Penghlis, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on my show. You're always welcome back. If my viewers and listeners want to find out more information about you, to listen to this podcast, The Lost Treasure, where would they find all this information online?
They could go onto Spotify. It's on Amazon and Google, but I would say Spotify is the best. And all four are now there. The last one, why I wrote these three stories, was published this week.
Oh,
So enjoy. They're just, I've listened to them and I forget the fact that I wrote them. They're just great stories.
Oh, I can't wait to hear it. Well, thank you so much for being a wonderful guest today. As I said, you're always welcome back. Have a fantastic day.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.